Welcome to the podcast summary of Nelson Mandela. Mandela's story is often told like a clean moral fable, but the real one is sharper, messier, and more impressive for it. He moved from nonviolent protest to armed sabotage, from prison to negotiation, and from revolutionary language to economic compromise, all while trying to hold together a country that could very easily have broken apart. And the big tension in his legacy never really goes away. South Africa won political freedom and a peaceful transition, but economic inequality and social damage proved much harder to undo. One of the most important things to get right about Mandela is that his politics changed, but they didn't change randomly. When the apartheid state kept crushing peaceful protest, he defended the creation of Umkhonto we Sizwe in 1961 as a practical response to repression. The idea was sabotage, not mass civilian bloodshed. Hit the machinery and symbols of apartheid, keep casualties as low as possible, and preserve the chance that black and white South Africans might still live together afterward. That matters because it shows he wasn't treating violence as a romantic gesture. He saw it as a grim political calculation inside a system that had closed off ordinary politics. Then at the Rivonia trial, even after being sentenced to life, he used the courtroom almost like a political stage. His "I am prepared to die" speech laid out the ANC's case for democratic equality so powerfully that he stopped looking like a defendant and started becoming an international symbol of resistance. Later, when negotiation became possible, he moved toward that too. But even that turn gets simplified. In 1985, F.W. de Klerk's government offered him conditional release if he renounced violence, and Mandela said no. He argued that a prisoner couldn't negotiate freely on behalf of an unfree people, especially while the ANC was still banned. So the shift toward talks wasn't surrender or sudden moderation. It was leverage. Those 27 years in prison also weren't just dead time. On Robben Island, political prisoners built something like a political institution in miniature. People from the ANC, the PAC, and other groups organized, argued, taught one another, and pushed for better conditions. That's why people talk about the University of Robben Island. Prisoners basically turned captivity into study, debate, and leadership training, which is a very human kind of defiance. Mandela himself was deliberate about it. He studied Afrikaans to better understand Afrikaner culture, built relationships with warders, completed legal studies by correspondence, and used discipline almost as its own kind of argument. By the 1980s, he had become probably the world's most famous political prisoner, even while the United States and other Western governments still treated the ANC as a terrorist organization and backed its suppression. That contradiction is worth sitting with for a second. The man later celebrated everywhere as a universal moral figure, was, for a long time, being classified by powerful states as part of the problem. When apartheid finally ended, Mandela made reconciliation the center of the transition. That was not the only option, and plenty of his supporters wanted punishment, or at least much harder retaliation against the white minority that had benefited from apartheid for generations. Instead, his coalition government included former enemies, including de Klerk and Inkatha leader Mangosuthu Buthelezi. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission followed the same logic. It investigated abuses by both the apartheid state and the ANC, and it offered individual amnesty in exchange for testimony. That process exposed torture, rape, assassinations, and bombings. It aimed less at conventional criminal punishment and more at truth-telling and political coexistence. You can hear the gamble in that approach. Mandela was betting that a shared future mattered more than full retribution, even though that left many people feeling justice had been softened. His symbolism mattered too. Wearing a Springbok rugby shirt and handing the 1995 World Cup trophy to Afrikaner, Captain Francois Pienaar helped turn a deeply white nationalist symbol into something closer to a national one. That image became famous for a reason. It was reconciliation made visible, with a rugby jersey doing an awful lot of historical labor. Still, critics on the black left, including Winnie Mandela and other more militant voices, argued that he spent too much energy reassuring white South Africans and not enough delivering deeper transformation for the black majority. Mandela's politics on the economy were complicated in a different way. He saw himself as both an African nationalist and a socialist, and he was heavily influenced by Marxism. Historical research and later statements from the ANC and South African Communist Party indicate that he had secretly joined the SAC-CP and served on its Central Committee. But he was never doctrinaire. He could carry socialist commitments and still act pragmatically when conditions changed. The Freedom Charter had supported nationalization of banks, mines, and land. In power, though, Mandela's government kept a liberal economic framework. The Reconstruction and Development Program was scaled back, and in 1996 it was replaced by GEAR, which leaned toward market economics, growth, and foreign investment. The left saw that as a retreat from the Freedom Charter. Mandela and his allies treated it as necessary if the new democracy was going to avoid capital flight and economic panic in the post-Cold War world. So here, again, he wasn't a simple icon of purity. He was making trade-offs, and those trade-offs shaped the South Africa that followed. The scale of the job facing his presidency was enormous. By 1994, about 23 million South Africans lacked electricity or adequate sanitation, 12 million lacked clean water, and nearly half the population was living below the poverty line. Against that backdrop, his government did expand basic social provision in big ways. It introduced free health care for young children and pregnant women, widened public primary care, equalized welfare grants across racial groups, connected 3 million people to telephones, extended electricity to 2 million people, and built 750,000 houses by the 1999 election. That's real transformation, especially in a country trying to build democracy while carrying the wreckage of apartheid. But the limits were real too. His administration was criticized for failing to confront HIV/AIDS, crime, corruption, and persistent inequality. By 1999, roughly 10% of the population was HIV positive. Mandela later admitted that he had personally neglected the issue during his presidency. That admission probably matters, because it pushes back against the saintly version of him. He could be morally towering and still miss something catastrophic. And the deepest tension in his legacy shows up here. Political democracy and racial reconciliation moved forward much faster than land ownership, wealth distribution, and economic power. Maybe the cleanest way to understand Mandela is to stop trying to make him simple. Scholars describe him as a hybrid leader, liberal Democrat, African nationalist, socialist, shaped too by traditional Xhosa consensus politics, and also willing to act decisively, even autocratically, when he thought the moment required it. He believed in democracy and human rights, but he didn't always lead by endless consultation. Sometimes he acted first and explained later. His global reputation had contradictions too. He was celebrated as a moral authority, while also taking criticism for friendships with Fidel Castro, Muammar Gaddafi, and Suharto, and for condemning Western intervention in Kosovo and Iraq. Mandela himself pushed back on the Messiah image. He said he wasn't a Messiah, just an ordinary man made into a leader by extraordinary circumstances. That feels like the right note to end on, especially when even the strange Mandela effect, the false memory that he died in prison, shows how thoroughly his life got turned into myth. The real Mandela was harder to summarize than the legend. He was strategic, contradictory, disciplined, often pragmatic, and still central to one of the most remarkable political transitions of the modern era. So if Mandela's legacy feels unresolved, that's because it is. He helped make a democratic South Africa possible, and he also left behind arguments that are still very much alive about justice, power, and what freedom is supposed to deliver. Honestly, that may be a better tribute than turning him into a statue who never had to choose between bad options. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.